Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude BeyondMystic, and welcome to this Precious Metals Report with Mr. Andy SCHECTMAN. You can find his work at milesfranklin.com. Let's give him a big warm welcome. Andy, welcome back to the show.
JC, always good to be here, buddy. Hope you're doing well.
Doing well, almost 100% back in the saddle. And I got to say, we just started early, Andy, and this hardly ever happens. So I know my friend Cliff High's in the chat, and he always bugs me that I'm 2-3 minutes late with my live stream. So there you go, Cliff. I'm early. Hopefully he's there and watching. All right. So, Andy, quite a few things are happening this week. A lot of it we can't talk about here, of course, with the health situation, but also with the revaluations of the numbers, let's just call it that, from last year's event. And that perhaps is going to be a big shakeup here in the confidence that people have in the US, but also in this world reserve currency. Let's start there. What are you tracking right now? And what are your friends and insiders telling you here? Are you seeing maybe an uptick from people who are trying to bet the opposite side of the system here? Let's start there.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting phenomenon, JC, where very few people ever really succeed in investing because they far too often follow the herd. And, you know, let's just be honest, the big money, the cartel who's been suppressing the price is pretty good at it. And for the new people who have jumped on to precious metals over the last, say, 6-8 months or even the last year, they may not be used to the volatility, the counterintuitive action that we see in precious metals far too often. And, you know, I think that there's a certain segment of the general public who has yet to fully grasp the severity or the gravity or the magnitude of what confronts us. And so while there has been a renaissance, while there has been a very large increase in demand right now, and again, a lot of that might be because, at least right now, the slowdown a little bit, because people are outside trying to enjoy life and just to get out and try to get back to something that resembles what normal is. The premiums have come down. The order volume has come down. Now, you know, again, I'm not trying to send the wrong signal. We had our record year last year, volume-wise, right, and we're already ahead of that this year. I'm still working 15 hours a day, you know, 7 days a week. So the demand is there, but it's not quite what perhaps it should be when you take a look around us and see the gravity. Honestly, I truly believe it is the best opportunity, price-wise, premium-wise, availability-wise, how fast we're able to ship immediately, that I've seen in 18 months. And I think it should be the opposite of that. And that's why the people, the big money, we have a lot of very large clients that are purchasing in this environment because, you know, the really successful contrarian investors look at this as the time to be buying. I would say right now the sentiment for gold is as low as I've seen it in 18 months. This is exactly the time to be buying it. This is when the Rick Rules of the world and the Eric Sprats of the world and legendary investors in resource stocks, this is when they buy, not when everyone is expecting it to continue to blast off, everyone being mainstream too. This is the time to be doing it. So somewhat of a conflicted answer there, JC, other than to say, in my mind, nothing's changed. In fact, it's growing by the day. And this entry point would be the best entry point I think someone's had, at least premium-wise, in the last many months.
I agree with you. And that's why I was saying earlier, like, what's the sentiment like? Because for some people, and of course, you can argue maybe that's not the right strategy, they only start buying when they see the price going up. So they're chasing that momentum. Whereas a lot of the smart money, the big money, as you're just talking about there, they're actually looking at events that are happening in the world and they're trying to front run that trade. And this is where you want to be. And I agree with Andy. Right now, if the sentiment is low and the premiums are low and the availability is high, why not get ready? Because I just had this interview with Bo Polney a couple of minutes ago, and he's charting the next couple of weeks here, and we're seeing chaos basically happening very, very soon here. And I'm also going to have this interview with Cliff High on Saturday. And I won't read that on the screen here, but the red part there has to do with that previous chart I just had up on the screen. So we're talking about some chaos there as well and some big changes. So let's get into that, Andy, here too. If this happens here, and I say if because, you know, a lot of us have been talking about this since January, and we've all been, oh, you guys are kooks and, you know, tinfoil hatters, you don't know what you're talking about. It was the safest thing in history. I'll just say it that way. But yet again, we're seeing evidence to the contrary, and it appears that we're coming to a head here. In your mind, does that affect the American buyer? Or does that affect more the worldview of the world reserve currency if for some reason we have a false pretendency, just to call it that way, and that is exposed for everyone to see? How does that moment shock and change, or maybe send shockwaves here into the precious metals market, in your view?
I think it affects everywhere. You know, you're dealing with the world reserve currency, the center of free trade. What does it say for the democratic electoral process? What does it say for the integrity and the honesty of the leaders of the Western world? You know, perhaps it would be eventually looked at as order was restored. But I guess what I'm just getting at is that if we're this far down the rabbit hole, what does it say? I think ultimately it would obviously be the best thing, especially to have a renewed confidence in the integrity surrounding the elections.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. I would say that it would be shocking to the world to believe that, you know, this beacon of light here in the United States is actually, or has actually been polluted by something as sinister and as flat out frightening as that. And
right.
But it doesn't, you know, take away from the fact that it would be wonderful if it actually did come so that we could all have confidence in the electoral process. But I think at first it would have some negative impact on the dollar, obviously, and ultimately probably pretty good for gold. I think this type of chaos is exactly why the biggest money in the world has been de-dollarizing for quite some time, and not specifically for this, but look, the chaos seems to be percolating more so than ever, and in so many ways, the divisiveness is becoming so extreme. You know, I watch what Cliff has to say, and he's talking about mid-August being the midpoint of all this chaos, and and so, you know, we're not too far from it. Maybe we see things here as we head into the fall.
Right.
Look, I don't know what the answer is. Simply to say, I think it would have a profound effect, at least at first, on the dollar, and that ultimately, conversely, would have a very positive effect, one would think, on precious metals.
For context for the audience here, for the Saturday interview with Cliff, I recommend you guys go check out Wooplosion. I think is one of the more prescient video here in terms of what's happening now and how the woo is basically taking over the narrative. We're almost at that tipping point where the mainstream media narrative can no longer hold to the masses of the woo coming out. So go watch that episode. And you also want to watch Wootage. This is an homage to the French sabotage. And we're seeing sabotage at every area or at every level here, not just in the health situation, but at the economy level, at the political level, where people are just now coming to the realization that they don't want to play this game anymore. And they're doing their little thing, whatever it is at their workstation that they can do to slow down this weird, I don't even know what to call it, parallel reality we're finding ourselves in here. And I think that's very exciting times. Again, that is spelling for all of us here, big, massive changes. And if we go back to some of those predictive linguistics, Cliff had the word panic for July, but change was the word of operation for August. So we're getting in there as well. So I'd like to ask you, if if for some reason in the next couple of days, maybe weeks, we see, I'm just going to switch gears here and get into the silver and what could also perturb the silver market here. We've been getting reports, as you know, you and I have talked about this since last December, that we were on this trajectory to disclosure about ETs, UFOs, and all that. The report came out. It was kind of a dud, but now we're hearing that this report might be eclipsed by some of the military officials who are trying to, here again, sabotage this takeover here, and would release some type of information about new technologies and all of that, and how maybe silver is a big component to that. Now, explain to the audience here who haven't watched maybe the last couple of episodes, what happened in the last year where we had this big flipping between investment demand and institutional manufacturing demand. So explain that first, and then let's push into that and extrapolate what could further happen to that if, in fact, we have this explosion of new technologies coming out that require silver.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, before I go there, a couple of shows ago, I think we talked about I had dinner with a naval fighter pilot not too long ago, and it was the gentleman who actually trained him in his I don't even know what they would be called, his trainer, was the one who was the whistleblower for these UFOs that were sighted around the naval ships in San Diego, I believe. And anyways, he said we should all be very frightened by it because the movements that these had without any evidence of propulsion, left, right, up, down, and into the ocean without the problems of viscosity, just straight down, straight up, he said was terrifying. He said it's either something as a UFO or another country has certainly got the leg up on us on technology. It's more or less what he said. Now, I found it to be one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had in my life. I couldn't even eat my dinner. And hearing it from this guy who was, straight shooter as they come.
Anyway, you weren't at Kurt Cheval, by the way, would it? Because it would be a terrible waste to waste one of those good steaks.
I'm still waiting. That day is coming, Jason. As soon as we're able to get up to that day is coming. Now, as far as your question about silver, I think it's a great one because I think about this a lot. What other asset is there that is bracketed so vividly on both sides by demand? On one end, you have the industrial demand in an expansion of uses in green and in battery and in all sorts of new technology that needs silver, a vital part of it. And on the other hand, you have this massive expansion globally in monetary demand. And there are really very few, if any, other assets, maybe a little bit platinum, but not really. It lacks both the monetary history, as far as I'm concerned, and the industrial side, yeah, fine. So it's a little bit, but bottom line is that when you look at silver, it might be really the only investment that has massive demand on either side between investment and industrial, and it's coming out of the ground at 7-to-1 ratio. And I've talked about how Keith Neumeyer publicly talks about that all the time. He's a friend of mine. He's told me personally, 7-to-1, meaning 7 ounces of silver are mined for every 1 ounce of gold globally, where only 30% of all the silver mined in the world comes from primary silver miners. 70% of the 560 million ounces of the 800 plus that have come out the last 2 years has been byproduct mining of other material where they stumble across silver. So it's a depleted asset, one that is increasing exponentially in uses, especially in the new green and digital environment. But yet you now have this awakening globally about the monetary benefits. And so I see a battle ensuing between the industrials and the investments where, they're both fighting for the same dwindling supply. This is a very unusual setup. Most, you look at something like copper, it's almost entirely industrial. You look at gold, it's almost entirely monetary. You have an asset that's depleted in nature, that is massively needed in industry, and is now arguably one of, if not the most undervalued monetary assets on the planet, which is trading just barely above half of its 1980 high.
Mhm.
So to me, you couldn't ask for a better investment, on top of the fact you have a government who's gone crazy, that has created what, 40% of every dollar that has ever been created in the United States was created in 2020. And so I think that, when you talk about just what kind of value silver offers, and what kind of backdrop, I don't know that you could find a better setup for massive increase in value, at the same time preservation in
Well,
mind, and privacy and what have you, than silver right now.
right. Just going back to what you said there. Well, first, I want to ask you a question. Can you recall, for the audience here, the exact numbers of that flipping, that percentage of investment demand versus industrial last year compared to what it is now? Do you have those numbers offhand? Just to tell the
Pretty
audience?
close to. So for the last 20 years, 80% of the demand has come from industrial demand. The gentleman who published, his name is Steve St. Angelo. His website is srsrocco.com, and he's a very smart man. Most of his analysis centers around the cost of pulling stuff out of the ground, the energy cost of pulling stuff out of the ground. Very smart guy. Anyways, this chart shows global mine production for roughly the last 20 years, where until 2020, so from 2019 and back, roughly 80% or more of the physical demand for silver is industrial, with a very large portion of it being in solar panels. But it's this year too where you're seeing all this expansion, this digital expansion and this green expansion, where that will increase. But what he shows since 2020 was an inversion, a flip-flop, where 80% of the demand, nearly 80, was monetary. Now this is 180 degrees from anything this industry's ever experienced.
Right.
And maybe this is why you're seeing such a huge amount of deliveries off of COMEX, north of 200 million ounces. The big money is ahead of this right now. And
Right.
so the last year and a half, this year included, it's inverted, where even in an expansionary environment where so much is going to industry, the monetary demand has experienced a renaissance. And, we had our biggest year ever last year. We're ahead of it this year, and probably 95% of every sale we ever do in the last year and a half has been related to silver. It is a depleted asset with massive demand on both sides of it. There will come a war between the industrials and the investors, I think, and we're not too far away from it at all. I think from that standpoint, in and of itself, the viability, the attractiveness of it as an investment, which is something I typically don't sell gold and silver as. To me, it's wealth.
Right.
But when you look at silver as an investment, all of the pieces are in place for it to, to be the buying opportunity of a generation. And honest to God, I mean that. And I'd love someone to try to poke holes in it, because I don't see another asset class on the planet that has the value, the use cases, and the demand globally.
And zero counterparty risk when it's in your position.
Yeah, and that's the thing about gold and silver. Doug Casey made this comment famous, that gold and silver are the only assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. Now, there may be a few others out there, but truth of it is when you have a 10-ounce bar of silver in your hand, or a gold or silver coin in your hand, there is no counterparty risk. Yeah. And so you're not reliant upon someone else to perform. And that's why people talk about the virtues of gold and silver in an inflationary period. It protects against the falling value of the currency. But there are those who will tell you that gold and silver actually do well, not silver because of its industrial aspect, but gold in particular will do best in a deflationary scenario, in a depressionary environment where counterparty risk is so prevalent, because of the fact that there is no counterparty risk. You aren't reliant upon another company or another individual to perform in a period of time where everything is slumping. So whether it's inflation or deflation, people need to own gold and silver right now because of its extreme value. If you don't, you're destined to go broke if all of your money is saved in dollars. I think that really is the key takeaway.
Well, just there too, you said 40% of the dollars in circulation were created this year alone. I'll remind the audience there that it took 100 years since the inception of the Federal Reserve to have $1 trillion in circulation. Now it seems we're printing that overnight in reverse repos these
How about
days.
this one, JC? This one blew me away. You know, we talk about the trivial side of Uncle Sam's financial accounts balance sheet, which is about $4 trillion, right? They have $4 trillion in assets. That's it. Against 27 trillion at the end of Q1 2021 that were on balance sheet in terms of liabilities, not to mention the 100+ trillion in unfunded Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government military pensions. Right. They openly admit that, they being the government, that their liabilities, both on and off balance sheet, funded and unfunded, exceed 140 trillion. Now, 140 trillion in liabilities against 4 trillion in assets, and we are the world reserve currency. Something doesn't seem right. Okay, so here's a pop quiz for you. What do you think that the Federal Reserve, or the U.S. government rather, calculates as their biggest asset of the 4 trillion? Do you know, JC, what their biggest asset is?
Student debt.
Oh, yes, indeed. Good for you. Student debt. The Federal Reserve calculates it at $1.58 trillion. Now, that's a liability on the consumer's balance sheet, but it is a asset of 34.7% of the total federal assets. Is the debt of our children. That's 3 times larger than the size of all the taxes that are receivable at 11.5%.
Right.
So, you know, when you talk about this country and the problems that we're in, it's very illusionary, the strength of this country, which, you know, and I'm very proud to be an American. I'm patriotic I'm a patriot. I love this country. I just hate the position that we find ourselves in, where we have become the largest debtor in the history of the world. And you have to ask yourself, at what point do our creditors, who have by their good graces given us the ability to live the way that we do, at one point do they say nuts to the dollar and move elsewhere? And this is the de-dollarizing that I've been talking about for a long time by the biggest money in the world, really, which is very obviously, to me anyway, de-dollarizing.
You know, talking about these big events, you just said nuts to the dollar, or whatever haircut could be announced. People look at that and say, that'll never happen. The United States, you know, they always kick the can down the road. They always do this. They always win. Well, let's go back down memory lane here. This was 1971 when Nixon on the Sunday night took us off that gold standard. I almost want to play the clip here just to remind the audience that, wow, okay, big events like this could and do happen. So it's not because it hasn't happened in 45 years that it won't happen again. And if you're looking at some of these cycles of times analysis, apparently we're at that Nixon moment right now. And there's a lot of things converging, pushing us to that moment. So what could that look like on a Sunday night here in the United States? And how shocking could that be? And then what happens to demand for all those people who usually wait till the last minute to act? You know, they're typical humans. They don't prepare. They're just, you know, they have to wait and see. And then they're like, oh my God, I have to rush to go buy toilet paper because there's no toilet paper. So is that going to happen to silver here again very soon, maybe very shortly?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there are a lot of those events lurking. How about the fact that according to the U.S. government's own financial report, the long-term unfunded pension liability just for Social Security is almost $56 trillion. And it keeps getting worse. Now, they, by their own numbers, projected to the Social Security Trust Fund to run out of money in 2030. And with all the people who have been locked down over the last 2 years and not working, those numbers are getting worse. And the funny thing about it is that just last year, after record inflation right now, we've talked about this on every interview, where the CPI, this bogus CPI, is at 5.5% right now. But John Williams says it's 13. The Social Security, the people who run the trust actually lowered their inflation forecast last year. And so, you know, I think they thought it would be 2.3% is what they factored in. I say wrong again.
Right.
So it's already double. So you have fewer people working. You have a faulty metric by saying that, well, inflation is only going to go up by 2.3%, and it's actually twice that, and it's not transitory, and it's getting worse. It's actually 6 times that, if you believe what John Williams is saying. So you run into, and let's not forget about the birth rate in the United States keeps dwindling. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there are problems, and they range from losing the singular world reserve status, they massive debt, and how about just a all-out abandonment of the Social Security program because it's broke, it's unfunded, and it's IOUs, and these are the problems that are happening right now that people aren't even focusing on.
Right, and part of the reason some, of course, you and I are focusing on this stuff, but why some of the Americans are in North, actually the whole planet is not focusing on this, is because of all this fog of woo, like all of these lies, deceptions, manipulations. Because on one hand, we see the work like John Williams at Shadow Stats, and then we have our Mr. B here, the presidency, telling you that his fiscal policy, if implemented, will actually reduce inflation. So let's just listen to his clip here, and then we'll dive into how absolutely ridiculous what he's saying really is.
I'm pretty confident that inflation is temporary, but if you're pumping all of this money into the economy, couldn't that add to...
No, look, here's the deal. Moody's today, when a Wall Street firm, not some liberal think tank, said if we pass the other 2 things I'm trying to get done, we will in fact reduce inflation, because we're going to be providing good opportunities and jobs for people who in fact are going to be reinvesting that money back in all the things we're talking about, driving down prices, not raising prices. And so it is, I sincerely mean this. Prices are up now, and they're up in, for example, you're in a position where you're trying to build a house, try to find 2x4s and lumber. Well, guess what? People stopped working cutting lumber. They stopped doing it because the unemployment was so down. Now all of a sudden there's this need because people are coming back, and guess what? Instead of paying 10 cents, you're paying 20. I mean, you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. It relates to what in fact is now needed because we're growing.
Okay.
I mean, he's so hard to understand. He makes no sense at all.
No.
You know, look, that's just a whole bunch of gibberish. And when you create that kind of money, another $1.9 trillion, I think is what he wants on top of all of the money they've already created. It is massively inflationary. And
when you say the money they've already created, we should precise there the money they've admitted they've already created, because there are reports that it could be much, much, much higher already. We just don't know about it.
Well, even Lawrence Summers, who is someone I really don't like, because, you know, for those of you who don't know who Lawrence Summers was, he used to be the former Treasury Secretary under Clinton, and then advised all the presidents all the way up through Obama. He also is famous for a report he wrote called Gibson's Paradox Revisited. And Gibson's Paradox is the inverse relationship between real interest rates and precious metals. And so, you know, this is a guy that understands about manipulation. And he came out and said that this 1.9 trillion relief package was the least responsible macroeconomic policy that he's seen in the last 40 years. And it may destabilize the economy and throw the US into stagflation. And I really think he's onto something there. I mean, I think we are heading into, if the government gets their way, a massive bout of stagflation, maybe hyperstagflation, with rising prices characterized by little or no economic growth. If the government is coming in and paying for all of the infrastructure, and it's like a synthetic demand, it's not real.
Right.
They're creating money and creating the opportunity for, you know, to make some money for some people for a little bit of time, but it's not an organic form of demand. And so and or of commerce. So I just think it only destabilizes things worse. It adds more debt to the problem, and it certainly doesn't take away from inflation. If anything, it will accentuate it probably greatly. And whenever you got the government coming in and doing these types of contracts, I don't think the government should just be out of it. It should be all private enterprise building up the infrastructure. When you get the government involved in it, it will be wasteful. It won't be what it's supposed to be. It'll only add to the problem.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, let's go back into this idea of silver. And thank you, Nicolas for that great comment here. He says that Andy's broker, Mr. Sherling, is fantastic. He kept in constant communication with me throughout my order. Thank you, JC. Hope you get a big commission. Thank you. I do get a referral out of that. And so thank you. And yes, I'm fully upfront that Miles Franklin is one of our referral programs. And of course, Andy has another special for you guys here today. We'll talk about that in a moment. But as we're lining up all of these events and times, I just wanted to share this one with the audience. Go check out my last interview I just did here with Bo Polney earlier today, and he was pointing at this August 16 to September 6 here time frame, and this green arrow coincides in a lot of his timing analysis with that Nixon moment. So we could be on that doorstep now as it pertains to his cycle analysis. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the other day too, I had Joe and from realistnews.net and also Penny Kelly on, and we were talking at some point here into this concept of this huge change that is upon us. Penny has been talking about this white wall for quite some time. When she does these look-sees, they're kind of like remote viewing, and she couldn't see past that white wall for a couple of months. And now finally she's seen past that white wall. And again, past that white wall, she sees here in the very near future, she was talking probably here between here and sometime in the fall before winter, the $700 or $800 silver that she had seen last year. So now that's coming into focus for her. So Andy, anything coming up on your screen? Because on one hand, we're like these are psychics talking here at $600, $700 or $800, but at the same time, there's the cycle analysis telling you that there's something up here, and their charts are all pointing to the upwards starting this week or maybe into next week here. What are your gut feelings telling you from some of the maybe big money or institutional money telling you as well? I know a lot of them have already took pretty much all the silver they could off the COMEX and some of these warehouses, but is there something else now recently maybe urging them to move even faster in terms of getting physical?
JC, no, other than the fact that I think there are a lot of people out there, even those who couldn't articulate it to save them lives, feel uncomfortable, they feel uneasy. Right. There is, and I often talk about athletics. I played sports my whole life and well into my 40s. And if you've ever played athletics and at higher levels, especially, you can sense when something's changing when you're involved in the game. Even if people watching can't see it, you can feel it. It's just one thing, maybe a ground ball that got by, and that's it. It's over. Things are changing. The
right.
tide turned. It's a loose analogy, but what I'm getting at is that there are times in life where we sense things. Maybe we all have greater perception than we realize. Oftentimes we discount these types of things as coincidental. Mm-hmm. Certain people on your show don't. They view it as they're just higher in tune to these types of feelings. I believe we're all blessed with good intuition. I think we're all blessed with these types of feelings. You think so strongly about someone and the phone rings and it's that person, but you blow it off to a coincidence. What I'm getting at is that I think we all feel that things are getting real on many levels. And even if we can't articulate it, look, there are very few places to safely put your money anymore. Period. That's just the way that it goes. Stocks, bonds, and real estate are all at all-time highs, factored against the lowest interest rates in history, and most of it unjustified. I heard a great analogy by George Gammon the other day, and I think it's very appropriate too. He talks about a hot air balloon, and it's supposed to be that the basket is the stock market, and the balloon is the economy. And as the economy goes up or down, left or right, crash or take off, it's based upon the economy pulling the stock market, pulling the basket. But in this perverted world we live in, it's inverted. Yeah. And you end up having a situation where in an environment that doesn't justify these levels, the stock market is the balloon and the basket is the economy, just trailing along whichever way the balloon or the stock market is taking it. And, you know, I would simply say to you that taking everything into effect, what Cliff has to say only accentuates my feeling that we're getting close to some event. And I feel it. And I don't know exactly what it is, but you can feel it, that there's this divisiveness. I guess I talk about, you know, black versus white, red versus blue, vaccinated versus not vaccinated, you know, rich versus poor. I mean, it's everyone is against everyone. The divisiveness, the dividing of this country, it's very obvious, you know, and politician versus politician. Ron DeSantis here in Florida is the object of the Democrat disdain, yet the Republicans think he's amazing. I mean, and on and on and on. And it never was quite so so divided. And I think that begins to lead into, it just seems we're getting closer to some sort of seminal event. And I don't know what it is, but look, I would tell you that there are very few assets in the world I would rather own right now than gold and silver, because we've talked about this before too. You know, if interest rates rise and the path that we are on, they have to rise. Either it's hyperinflationary policy by the Fed, which leads to higher interest rates, or they just back away from manipulating the bond market and everything implodes. Both of those lead to the same place. And I think for people not to realize that, for them to continue to look for green shoots and hope springing eternal, is a massive mistake. And I don't mean to sound like the purveyor of doom, but I think there's a fine line between pessimism and realism. And I think the bottom line is, if you save in dollars, you're destined to go broke. And the biggest money in the world is showing us that. And what's even more diabolical is that the traditional forms of protecting oneself have been polluted, whether you're talking bail-ins with the bank, gatings with the money markets, or, you know, just the rapid debasement of the dollar against something as commonplace as a 10-year Treasury investment. When I started in this industry in 1989, a 10-year Treasury was about 9%. So you could put $2 million into a layering of 10-year Treasuries and make $180,000 a year and never touch your principal. Leave that for your kids. That same investment now, instead of $2 million, would cost you $20 million. So there is nowhere to safely put your money. And as interest rates rise, it used to be stocks and bonds were inverse of one another. Risk on when you work, risk off into bonds as you retire. They've lost that inverse correlation now because of these low interest rates. And they'll continue to try to push them more negative and drive them down more in real terms to continue to kick the can down the road. But at some point, the world loses confidence and realizes, if we're going to buy a currency that is being devalued so rapidly, we need to be compensated for that devaluation. And if your interest rates are negative in real terms, at what point do they say, nuts to the dollar? And I think it's coming, JC. Honest to God, I really do believe it's coming. And I hate, you know, one of the bummers about my job is that you try so hard to help people, but the message that you bring is one that people don't want to hear, because it's certainly not, it's not cocktail party conversation, you know, and I just want people to know I'm trying to be as straightforward and honest as I can. If anyone out there, maybe Cliff could, because he's smart enough, tell me, where do we put our money other than precious metals where we can feel safe about it in this environment? Because it ain't cash, it ain't stocks, it ain't bonds, it ain't real estate. And, you know, even the most ardent crypto fan may say, you know, read the comments out of Coinbase today. That the CEO of Coinbase is saying this stuff's getting real fast because they want to do this new infrastructure project by taxing the heck out of anyone who runs crypto exchanges or is a broker of cryptocurrency. So they're going after that too. So the alternatives are becoming fewer and further between, just like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I just tweeted about that just before the show here. But if we were to ask Cliff High where to put our money, I think he knows of a really cool anti-gravitic RV dealer on Mars. so that's the technology of the future. And apparently those are going to be really, really hot commodities here very soon. So anyways, just have a little bit of fun with that. Andy, let's end the show here today with this great special. Of course, Renee says on the screen, I love Andy's, I think she meant sincerity. And I do too. So thank you, Andy.
Real quick, let me just answer John Colquitt. Let me just answer his. So in 1980, I was 10 years old. So this is coming from my father. In the middle of the oil embargo and inflation that was raging as high as 20%, there were a lot of gas stations where I used to live in Minneapolis, I was told, that at the time would give a gallon of gas for a silver dime. Now, a silver dime right now is worth about $2 melt value, real close. Mm-hmm. And that's with silver at 25. So you're talking $4 silver for a silver dime. In 1980, gas was much less than that. Mm-hmm. The point of it is that, to John's point, would you rather have currency that everyone is playing hot potato with, or alternatives in a world where alternatives are few and far between? Exactly. And that's the thing about gold and silver, is that will always be viewed as wealth. Always has been, always will be, no matter what. So to John's question, Britannias, kangaroos, 1 ounce silver coins, great. If you want something with greater flexibility. Now, this is for the US people, because sending pre-65, even though Canada made dimes and quarters, and I don't know what year they stopped it. I'm assuming it's somewhere near 65 when they did in the States. When?
68.
68. So it has less silver than the US coins do per dollar, but shipping that into Canada would trigger a VAT tax of, I think, 13%, because it's under 3.9 fine. Anyways, for US people, having dimes and quarters would give the ability to do transactions just like John is mentioning. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, JC. That one just stuck out to me.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I appreciate you saying that too. I used to have this story about gold too, how, it'd buy you a nice suit, the shoes, the tie, and a nice dinner at $35 an ounce. And here we are today at 2,000, and you can buy a nice suit, a dinner, but you can't do that with your $35 in paper. That's for sure. You can't even buy the tie for $35 anymore.
I got one more for you. In 1960, the Census Bureau says a house in the United States was basically $17,000. And gold was $39. You divide that into it, it's like 435 ounces, something like that. So people say, well, gold doesn't pay any interest. Okay, so you stuff those 435 coins under your mattress in 1960 and pay for your mortgage. Instead, take out a loan to pay for your mortgage. And here we are 60 years later with that earning nothing but dust under the mattress. And if you take those 435 coins out, it originally would have been $17,000. What's it worth now? You're talking almost $1 million. So the point is that even though it doesn't pay interest, what it does is it retains its purchasing power, because if it bought you one house back then, it actually accentuated your purchasing power, because the average price of a house in the United States is just over 300 grand. So it buys you 3 houses, earning no interest. So all of these traditional things that we are taught to believe about gold and silver, and the fact that it doesn't pay interest, you know what? Where we are heading in a world of debasement and a monetary twilight zone, gold and silver must be held. And if you don't, I think you'll regret it when we see these resets, these
Nixon moments.
Yes, these Nixon moments, absolutely. So that's the point.
So Andy, talking about pet rocks, as the mainstream media wants to talk to us about them, what have you got in store for the audience this week? And I noticed that you've brought down the premiums again this week.
Yeah, so Jason, I try to really bring out something special. And in these prices, I think your listeners will see that our prices are as good as anywhere in North America. A lot of companies may offer somewhere similar to these prices if you buy 1,500 ounces or something. We're doing it any quantity. We're doing the 2021 Britannia at $375 over, the 2021 Silver Kangaroo at $395 over. I like the kangaroo. That little box there is that they're the only coin of all the 6 major mints that make mini mint boxes of 250, tubes of 25. Everyone else, like the Britannia and the Eagle and the Maple Leaf,
500.
all 500.
Yeah.
So my 14-year-old daughter could carry one of those around the house without much problem at all. But I do try to make sure that the offers that we're making for your listeners are legitimately as good of a price as they'll find anywhere. And it is out of my distinct appreciation for working with you.
And just to be precise, also, you talked about the fact that yes, there's VAT tax when it comes to your junk silver in the United States being shipped to Canada, but that's not the case here for the bullion we're talking about.
Right. In Canada, if silver or gold are imported at under 24 karat or 3.9 fine silver, there would be a VAT tax. And so just about anything we sell won't be taxed that way. Good rule of thumb is that anything that is numismatic, in other words, older coins pre-33 or any of the old silver coinage, whether it be the silver dollars or the dimes and quarters, would carry that VAT tax, unfortunately being imported into Canada. I've sent it up there before. People knowingly pay that 13% VAT, which is collected at the border. But if that's what someone wanted to do, we could do it. Short of that, we want to stick with 3.9 fine or better.
And with some of your partners and suppliers in Canada, is it possible also for you to get the Canadian junk silver for our Canadian audience?
Probably. No. See, the only issue with that is that as long as we're the biggest problem is that I think we would still have to be paid in US dollars. If we get paid in US dollars by a bank wire, my inclination is yes, I could have that shipped from one of our Canadian distributors. So opening up a Canadian bank account is something we've talked about before, but it opens up all sorts of issues with Revenue Canada, Revenue Quebec, and what have you that we have kind of tried to steer clear of. So if the Canadian listeners wired the funds in US dollars, then yes, my inclination would be we could probably get that taken care of pretty swiftly.
Okay. Very good. Carly Simon says, JC, could you please provide Andy's email as my application seems to have gone unnoticed?
At milesfranklin.com.
Yeah.
I will gladly reply to that immediately.
But Carly, if you had the return email to that form, and when you filled out that form, send it to me also at jc@beyondmystic.net. I'll have our tech guys look just to make sure that maybe there's not a problem with the form, because just in the last couple of days, I've seen the form go by and Andy's responding to them. So there might have been a glitch. Oh, Carly, when our website went down, there might have been an issue with the mail server at that point. So that could be what you're alluding to.
I'm getting I'm getting them. In fact, I just got one 10 seconds ago from.
Right. I could see the things go by. Okay, but thank you, Carly. And so please send it either directly to Andy, the email he just provided to you, or to mine, and we'll get that sorted out for you. And I do apologize. It is possible that some of those forms just went into the black hole when we suffered that denial of service attack on our website there a couple of weeks ago. Okay. Wow. Andy, time flies. Man, thank you so much for being here today, Andy. Thank you for spending all of this time and sharing this knowledge. And of course, for your sincerity, as Renee was saying earlier on the screen, I really appreciate that. And folks, thank you so much for joining us here today for this weekly precious metals review with Andy SCHECTMAN. And of course, you can find him also at milesfranklin.com. So tonight, folks, I have Mariam Hanin coming back to the show for another Quantum Woo episode. You don't want to miss that. We're going to talk about near-death experiences and anesthesia. It's going to be a cool show. Different take on maybe what you've heard before, but that's going to be a cool show. And of course, tomorrow I've got Dix Weir coming on, and we're going to talk about Beyond Crypto Woo. So we'll definitely be talking about silver as well. That's going to be at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow, so don't miss that. And of course, the big highlight here this weekend, Saturday, this episode here, Beyond Alta, the something return in red. I won't read that here. You can check that out at beyondmystic.net/pay-per-view to check out for that episode. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I'm JC at Beyond Mystic, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. You take care.